and we shivered when the cold winds blow.
Well, I think that it all started when I was a really little kid. I had a different upbringing than a lot of people did. When I was really young, my family lived close to Little Atlan Lake, and all of us lived there. My great grandma and her uncle, my uncles, and all sorts of stuff lived right in the nearby vicinity. And at that time, I got to hang around with them and hear a lot about stories and things like that. And of course, we didn't do things in a very, I guess, formal manner. But I got to live a little bit of the lifestyle for the first 5 years of my life. I grew up with stories and things like that, and a lot of things in regard to the way old people would think and what could happen, right? And so it was like that. And when I was 5 years old, we moved into Whitehorse. And at that time, my mom's family kind of started to drift away from each other a little bit. But after a couple of years, my great grandma had to move out of that house, and she needed some elder care, and so she came to live with us. And it was at that time, I think, that I really began to come to understand a little bit about myself and where I come from. I would come home after school, and as opposed to a lot of kids who are watching cartoons and stuff, and I did do a lot of that too. But for a little while, I had my great grandma there, and she would tell me stories and bring me up. And it's really formed a lot of who I am today. And so for a number of years after that, I really did live the more normal lifestyle. Things moved on, and I grew up till I was probably about 14 years old. And I started to get it to become interested in dancing and stuff like that. And so I got involved with the dance group a little bit. As it turned out, about a year later, I was at the Yukon International Storytelling Festival, and there was a group that came up from Alaska called Nakahiri Theater. And my grandpa's uncle Austin Hammond was with them, and as it turned out, he had a culture camp that he had started a few years before that in order to train leadership for the upcoming generations. So what you spoke about is something that he definitely touched on in the way he felt about like what's going to become of us, what's going to become of our people. He felt strongly in that way. And so I was lucky enough to be invited back over there, and they took me with them, and I got to stay at the Raven House in Haines, Alaska, and I partook in a lot of stuff, and I certainly did learn a great many things from those people, and just about where we come from, and it has a lot to do with what keeps me motivated today. Actually, my mind casts back to those sort of people, and they're very motivational in my life. And I think when I look at the future generations, I find myself at this point, I'm just about to turn 29, and I find myself wondering what's going to become of us in our future generations.
I guess I would say that one of the great gifts of my life was to have a chance to do anthropological field research in Native communities. I'm very grateful to the people who opened up their communities and a small part of their lives to share with me. And it really pushed me to read more and study more in archives and libraries about these problems. There's a lot of negative elements that sometimes get focused on about Native communities. The change is a big part of it, and how cultures change is an interesting question. I think one should be open to the possibility that change can be a positive thing if it's effectively managed by the people themselves and by partners such as the state and industry.
So what I told the college, Yukon College, is to train people, encourage them to learn. But when the elder talked to them, listen, preserve it, keep it, because you never know when you're going to need it. Because our elder told us whatever could happen, it could have flipped like that. So I think we're in for a big surprise. I know 50 years, 60 years ago, the elder told me I couldn't buy water. I'd say, you crazy. But now I'm buying it. See, everything elder predicted is going true. Like Dempster Highway, they predicted 100 years ago. And they say, where's the highway going to come out? Northwest Territory, the highway came out. And what's going to happen to our land, all that is here now. And what's going to happen to our game now is getting bad.
I've been around here for about 15 years, and I think that influenced the rest of North America. It's all becoming the same, and people really want it. People are saying, yeah, bring it on, you know. Give me a big box store, you know. Give me the cereal that everybody else eats. Give me the internet and the TV, and, you know, I want to drive the same cars as everybody else, and, you know.
There's two main time frames that I see a lot of change in northern Alberta, in the isolated region where I work. And one is 1890 to 1900, when you see the first missionaries reaching these communities, or the lakes where people lived in cabins and tents at the time. The less isolated communities were signing treaties, which effectively extinguished not only their land title, but also the land title of the people in the isolated interior who never really got reserves or the benefits of treaty. And so all these things are happening around 1900. With all this rapid change experienced at the same time, you also see people experience manifestations of a syndrome or a belief that they were becoming a Witiko, which has been anglicized as Wendigo or a cannibal monster. So people actually believed, and there are numerous documented cases of this in northern Alberta and adjacent regions that my friend Nathan Carlson has documented. People believed they were becoming Witiko. Some of them were imprisoned. And so I think all these things go together, and you see a lot of changes occurring. Then again, following World War II in the 1950s, a new round of missionaries comes in. What a lot of people don't realize is that in the 1950s and 60s, through vast parts of northern Canada, people were not living on reserves or living in year-round communities. Effectively, the majority of Native people were living I'll use a non-technical term, nomadic lifestyles, in terms of spending the year at different places and congregating at lakes for their summer ceremonies and in order to exchange news and meet people and go fishing. So this really began to change when oil came in. As I said, the Protestant, evangelical, and Pentecostal missionaries came in around the same time in the 50s and 60s. And so, again, all these changes hit people at the same time, and it was hard for them to distinguish what aspects of their lives were changing due to which external causes. And people tend to experience these changes as kind of a complex. And so, certainly within 10 years of the initial encounter with the oil patch, most people were living in settled communities around day schools that had been started by these new churches. So the changes were very vast within a 10-year period in the 50s and 60s.
Other Western societies have been living on a capitalist income for centuries now, and we haven't. And so when that came in, it just dramatically changed our way of life, and that's why we fell. You know, that's why our evolution was compromised, because we weren't used to that sort of capitalist society, that individualistic society. We were more of a communal society.
But Whitehorse has changed so much that I say it's all for the better. We can't hold up progress. Progress helps us. So the way I see it, that we used to have to pay for our own Medicare. Norm Chamberlain came along and said, well, enough of this. So next thing we get free Medicare in Yukon as status native, I do. And I can cross borders freely because of the Jay Treaty. And the Jay Treaty, people want to know, they can look up on the internet what the Jay Treaty really is, how it gave us our freedom to cross all borders freely, because they put the border in. So we were nomadic as Tlinkits. We went into Teslin, car crossed Tagish, Champaign, Haines Junction, and right up into northern Yukon.
It's gone. It was gone, I think, from the 50s on 60s. We should remember, I always say, the people the elders of today, grew up at the same time I did. I mean, you know, during those times, should remember the teachings of our grandparents and our parents, but they don't. They don't. My aunt is staying in Inuvik now with my cousin, her son, and we talk about culture a lot, and we share all what our parents. She's 14 years older than I am, but we talk about our culture. Where did it go? Where did it go? What happened to it? All the sharing, the kindness, you know, it's not here anymore.
When you're looking at European colonization in the Americas, which began in the 15th century, there are two general motivations behind the European drive to conquest. And one of these is largely political economic, which is to say Europeans wanted to expand their dominions and also capture the resources of the New World. Of course, it's also true that people wanted to find a fast way to Asia, which they also wanted to colonize and kind of enmesh in the growing capitalist market of the world. The second mainstream or motivation is religion. There was a genuine desire to save souls of native people. This was tempered by a debate between prominent theologians about whether natives actually had a soul. And so you can see some discussion about whether the people they were encountering were even human and what sort of rights did they have. It was eventually agreed by most people on a theoretical level that natives did have souls and did have the rights that God gave to Europeans, for instance. However, on a practical level, this was not fully implemented. As we know, of course, many of the colonial societies were extremely non-egalitarian.
I myself always think that the missionaries, when they first had the residential school in the province, the missionaries forced our parents to send us to school as little as we were. And so when we went to the residential school, like our parents still still hunted on the land, still traveled the land, but we were sent to school, and what our parents thought was at the time that we would be in a warm place instead of traveling out in the cold land with them. And you know, they were always worried about hunting and hope they get their kill so we'd have enough meat to feed the family. All those worries was with them. When we went to residential school then, I didn't know I was going to be 9 years old that fall. In September, I went to school and they didn't allow us to speak our language. Right from the time when we arrived there, they told us through somebody who translated to us in our language that we're not supposed to speak our language, we're supposed to learn English very fast.
To break that race down, you take the language away. They wouldn't allow us to speak our language. If you did, you there you go again with that ruler, with that pointer, or the strap. So you lived in fear, You never know when you were going to get hit from the back, or when you were going to be taken to the priest so he can molest you, And just a nightly visit to the priest, or just that the nun would say, "Who wants to get blessed by the priest?" So we herded like little sheep down to the priest's room and put us on his laps, and I had to forgive. And say, I went to look for his grave. I went to look for their graves. There's 3 of them that molested me. I went to look for their graves, and I saw their graves. I wanted to stomp all over their grave, and wanted to, but I didn't do it. I just cried and prayed to God that, to forgive them, let them go.
Stories were told throughout generations. It was handed down through generations of our ancestors. But once with education came in, they took that tie away, or that being bonded with your past, your parents, being bonded to your way of life through your parents and your grandparents and elders in your community. I think it was really me, I look at it as being ashamed of your culture, your parents' ways, their ways, which was primitive, that type of thing. So that's when we sort of got into the adaptation to another type of culture. Over the years, as each generation was born, they grew up into a much more different, the culture was left behind. And because of residential school, and they're taking away our language, the kids that went to school as little as 3, 4, 5 years old don't know their language. Myself, I went when I was 8 going on 9. I taught my language because I was old enough by then. They couldn't fully take it away from me, but because that's what I spoke. So until today, I still speak it, and I'm a translator for it.
Our people didn't sign treaty right away till 1885. 1885 was the year Great Grandpa Wonder Spirit got hung, November. He was the one who told about what was going to happen to his people if they signed this paper. The missionaries and Northwest Mounted Police lassoed down his poles, and it was the last Sundance ever, because then he was on the run. And when he told his people what was going to happen to our people if they signed this paper, they said, "Men kana." They're going to put you in men kana, meaning they're it's like a fence. They're going to fence you in. The Indian Act is like a big fence.
And it's just shortly after this, after the reserve system is created, that you really see residential schools become a major force across Canada. In the residential schools, basically the government paid the churches on a per capita basis for the number of students they had. So the churches were empowered to go out and collect students. They called it in French la recherche des enfants, which they conducted by canoe. They would paddle out in the fall and come back with a load of children. And churches also used coercion on parents in a mild way in terms of threatening to withhold relief or rations, which the churches were often in charge of delivering. And the churches also sometimes lied to the parents to claim that the church had more power over government's income transfers than they did, so that people would actually be afraid of losing child benefits, family allowance, all these types of payments to the individual, which the church really shouldn't have been part of, were used to coerce families to, in effect, give up their children.
Frog Lake Massacre is a history book about what happened in Frog Lake. That is the story of my great-grandpa Wanting Spirit in for shooting the priest and for shooting the Indian agent, and in May 1885. He did that after they took down his Sundance Lodge. They lassoed down his poles. That was the 4th day of the Sundance. After my grandpa shot the priest and the Indian agent, he was on the run. They caught him 3 times. He allowed himself to be caught 3 times. He could have ran away. After that, after he got hung, 240 of my relatives ran to the States with the bundles.
This is for children. Children didn't ask to be born. They were born because, we're there. We bore them. So now we have to teach them. We have to think of them and build a world for tomorrow for them. But it's only if all of us tend to change our thinking, because respect is not there. Too much of disrespecting her, the whole universe, you name it, life. And that's why we're losing life.
They have become chief. That really ruined everything. But I think I'll do it again if I have to do it. Because a lot of young people need help, and now the change in climate has turned everything around. My days is a different way of living. Today it's a new life, complete new life. So I had to turn the clock back 50 years.
I think it's part of a cycle. I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for being part of the natural force. I think we are a natural force. We're really different from a lot of the other natural forces around here. When I first came to Whitehorse, it seemed really different. Like, it was like, wow, this place is different, you know? People are here for like a different reason, you know? There was, you know, people wearing furs, you know? This was the thing, I do that. And now it's, Whitehorse is government workers, you know? It's people driving their kids to soccer practice. I mean that's what I do, you know? Families, and it's family town, and it's government, and just kind of that whole, I just see it all like that homogenization, you know, of it all. Like what they eat in Florida, what they watch on TV, that's what people want here. It's like they're not really looking for that really different experience. It's like, make it like everywhere else. Now that I live here, I want it to be like everywhere else.
Development is good to the point of where future generations will survive, but they will also have to be taught respect again, because how much development do we need? You know, to our elders, if they went out to Edmonton, Alberta, they go into a grocery store. There is rows and rows and rows of food, you know. And there's another store down the street, that's the same way. Another store down, clothing galore. What do we need to take all that for? I know, of course, to people that are doing it, I guess probably providing jobs for, you know, for people to do that. But where do we stop? Where do we stop? And all that food there, all that meat there, do we need it all? It's like, that's development, isn't it? Creating jobs and more and more and more. For what?
There are not many lakes who have that purity, but also the beauty of the lake, the mystery the lake has, because there's nothing touched. The shoreline was never interfered with. So when I go out, especially when you come from Central Europe, where every stone is turned over, wherever you go, you follow somebody else's footstep. Here, by my wilderness adventure groups, when I go out with people, the trails we have, I created them, you know, and every stone has never been turned. So I love that magic and the mystery what the land has here.
Right.
Changes of people.
And if we stop consuming, and if we were smart consumers, for sure. Like even the cleaning products, they're always using bleach here. Bleach, you know, like we need those organisms, a lot of them. And like hand sanitizers, people don't know that hand sanitizer keeps on killing. You know, it goes into the waterways and it just keeps killing. And like the simple things like that, people just trust that all these chemicals mixed together are safe for me to put on my skin and consume, and that's not safe. People need to be aware and know what they're buying, and how companies and corporations work, and how, you know, how the mainstream works, and not just accept everything that comes our way because it smells good or it tastes good or, you know, it looks good. We don't, you know, we can't keep accepting that kind of thing.
I hear the term sustainable development used a lot by, you know, corporations and governments, and in my perspective, from what I've noticed, the sustainable part is usually just used as a facade, a blanket of security to make us feel safe about the future, you know, and we need to get past that. A lot of the times they say sustainable development, and then they just go through with the development part and just forget about the sustainable part. You know, a lot of people think that they can just manipulate the land in any way that they can, and they think they have this ownership over the land, but it's actually the land that owns us, because the land would be just fine without us, and we would die without it.
Well, the glacier fascinates me from early childhood. When I stepped the first time on a glacier, I trembled, because you literally walk into another landscape. You know, the rules are different when you're on the ice. And what touches me deeply is that the glacier is a device where we can look back thousands of years. Nothing gives us so much reference into history as the glacier, and the way it changed the landscape over the years.
Canadian wheat was really the pillar of Canadian prosperity in the early part of the 20th century. And so opening the prairies and getting Native people off of the prairies was key to this. Then later, around 1900, you have Treaty 8 in the north, parts of the Northwest Territories, northern BC, northern Alberta, northern Saskatchewan. They're beginning to open up the north for things like the Klondike Gold Rush, transportation, mining, and then later in 1921, the signing of Treaty 11 in the Western Arctic, which is now the Northwest Territories. And so pacifying natives, addressing native title issues, extinguishing native title in favor of the Crown was really a major part of the treaties, and getting native people concentrated or centralized on reserves was a secondary part of this. And they really thought that this would make it easier for native people to be enculturated to our society through the school system, and also that they would become farmers or adopt Western working class occupations. There's a number of reasons why I don't think it worked, and one was it wasn't very consistently implemented. There was always two opposing goals or two opposing views of what people thought would happen and what would be the good for Canada. And one of these was that Native people would inevitably either die out through a combination of natural attrition and demographic collapse, or else be basically absorbed into the body politic in such a way that even racially they would cease to exist. Individuals would become indistinct, as miscegenation or marriage with whites would inevitably occur. It was believed that people were not on the same level of evolution, but the natives could be advanced through education to the level of some of the lower whites with whom they would then intermarry. So this turned out to be a flawed view. Native people had a remarkable loyalty to their own culture, so the idea that natives would just die off through basically by marrying whites proved to be flawed. And certainly their loyalty to culture and language was very strong. Also, however, I think the original architects of the Indian policy overestimated the desire of white Canadians to have Aboriginal people living among them as equals. So at the same time as people wanted to assimilate natives, there was also always a secondary trend in policy to isolate and protect them. And some of this can be seen in the Indian Act, the treaties, and the residential schools. All of these institutions are very confused because they really have two goals. And different people at different times thought of themselves as implementing either assimilation or protective policies. And the protective policies today we would see as paternalistic, but both the assimilation and the protective, the people at the time often thought they were doing what was best for the natives. Even people we now consider humanitarians held views on natives that we would today consider very assimilative.
Because there was a time in our history where it was against the law to potlatch. It was also against the law to participate in Sundance. And so, you know, people's masks and things like that, the regalia were confiscated and burnt up, or else put into museums. Like a lot of our stuff is in some of the big museums in Canada. So I think there's been, all over the world. I think there's really been a revival of that whole art, and these boys are a part of that.
First and foremost, the language is systematically taken away in residential school, literally beaten out of the kids. They were beaten for speaking their language, and a lot of them couldn't speak English, and they were beaten for not speaking English, and so it was in that way it was brutally taken away, and it's been very difficult bringing it back, because I think it brings back a lot of harsh memories for a lot of people. We have and we do have language programs that are successful. We have a native language teacher program at Yukon College, as well as other native language programs in Whitehorse and throughout the communities. But the plain old fact is that if I wanted to learn my language, I would have to take the time to do it. No amount of money is going to let me learn my language. It's a lot of work that I have to go through, so I have a personal responsibility to try to learn my language if I want to ensure that our language is kept alive, and as does everyone else, So there are opportunities to bring it back. What we're looking at in Old Crow, for example, is an integrated land-based experiential learning program where you take the kids out on the land to teach them things about academics and science, using maybe caribou and moose and salmon to teach science and biology and whatnot. But at the same time, you have an opportunity then to teach them their language, because we have a word for everything on the land, every animal, so there is an opportunity there to learn the language and to incorporate it into the education system. It's going to take time. We're not going to do it next year, but it's going to, over maybe a 10 or 12 year period, we'll be able to incorporate and develop a program that's going to incorporate language right into the education system.
I know for myself, being in this group, I get a sense of security, and it's my hope and inspiration just to be with this group, because it gives me strength, growing spiritually, emotionally, all of that, and learning the culture and the heritage. Passing that on to my children is so important, because I want them to know who they are and where they come from, and to be proud of that, and to be able to pass it on to their children. I'd like to be able to speak to my grandchildren in my native tongue. And whereas my grandmother could not do that with me, because that was taken from her.
My language is documented, but I don't speak it. And I could learn it from tapes and the internet and taking a course, but that fire and that understanding of relating to another person who is speaking about that language or to me in that language is going to be missing. I could learn how to make a fire step by step from a textbook, but again, that gentle way of teaching, or that traditional knowledge, or that love that comes with it is going to be missing. And that's something that is scary, and I don't know if it coincides with a school system, with the system we have.
All these changes occurred, and throughout the 20th century, what I see is basically an increasingly hegemonic or coercive presence of the Canadian state in people's lives, and a general attempt to undermine traditional social structures in order to recapitulate a Western model based on a nuclear family of people essentially out for their own good in a free enterprise system. This was very contrary to the Aboriginal tradition of a more communal approach to life, and I do regard many aspects of their traditional values as much more positive in terms of supporting and sharing one another and living out obligations to one another. Beginning in the 50s and 60s, suicide became a notable problem. It's also true that Aboriginal people have suffered from higher levels of mental illness, and in many cases have been forcibly incarcerated. Here in Alberta, many Aboriginal people were forcibly sterilized in a sort of a eugenic process in the 30s that was designed to weed out undesirable people.
So what I think the government have to study, so that inherent right now they give us somebody you gotta do this to trap. We know how to trap, we know how to handle everything in this country. And they change trap every 2 years, change the law. So how are we gonna make a living? Because you just make enough, maybe 2-3 years, paid for trap, and there you go, change the law again, so I had to buy that trap, throw the other one away.
With my status card, I can cross the border freely. Like the president called our prime minister down, he had some paperwork he wanted to sign. And he said, this letter, I want you to sign. It's called the J Treaty. And the J Treaty was the treaty that gave us First Nations the rights to cross all borders freely. North, south, east, and west. So my grandfather, he migrated here. And he applied for homesteaders' rights, 1928. He was turned down. They said, an Indian cannot own land. So, he gave up his Indian rights to be self-ruling and self-supporting. So he applied for homesteaders' rights again. And we have this letter from 1928 stating an Indian could not own land, which was our land. So he did it. He gave up his rights to be self-ruling and self-supporting.
Even geographically, when I drive in the Athlin Road, Mount Minto, the big volcano out there, you know, it's like the doorman to Athlin. And when you are here, people talk about going out because it is a world in itself. And difficult for some people to be here because there is no support system, you know. You have to draw the strength from within. But for other people, it's inspirational and it's very powerful for self-development. That's why that was the reason why I built the school here, not near the metropolitan. As the motto is, you come here to have a breakthrough and nothing less. And when people write their testimonials, they say, my life has changed. So that's why I have people here from around the world, as far as Australia and from Europe, etc. My setting you see from here, that's what I live with, you know, from all my windows. I have this panorama. But it keeps constantly changing because of the light, the quality of the light, and the storms coming across the lake in the winter. So that's why I put the chair there, because I have some 100 photographs from this place as we sit here, and each one looks different, just because of the change of the light. But since the chair tells everybody it actually is the same place, as otherwise one would think, so there are 100 different locations. Fascinating, the power of the light, and I bring it a lot in my visual teaching, in the arts, because so often we see just light as a matter of light and dark, instead understanding light, how creatively it can be used to express things through light. As that's what nature does constantly. Mark making is to me important also in teaching art, or how do you live? What marks do you make in life and what marks do you not make? And also marks I find in the land, which the force and the energy of the land makes, exciting to have that connectedness. And what marks do I make in my art making? Very, very important. We asked ourselves very little so far in the evolution, how we came along, what marks do we leave behind? It's a mess.
The Dempster Highway is a big issue for us because the Tedlit-Gwitchin, they're in the Mackenzie Delta area, and they hunt on that road. And we've been trying to get more regulations for that road, because there's been a lot of caribou that have been just pretty much wiped out there. So things like that happen with roads and highways, and it's sad to see.
I went to school with the kids that were probably the most poverty-stricken, the ones that were from the village, we say. And in those days, like I was mentioning earlier, it was just, things were way worse back in the 70s than they are now. And that kind of shows our, the progress we've made as people. But what happened was I was in French class, and we had a new French teacher. And she came in and she looked around, and she was so disgusted. It was obvious on her face. She looked at us with such hatred. She looked at us with such disgust. And I was so mortified by that. And I was 10 at that time. And so she spent the first half an hour, even longer, talking about personal hygiene. She talked about, you guys need to be clean and you need to wash so you don't get lice and worms and blah, blah, blah. She totally humiliated us. And I looked around the classroom and I saw that that really familiar look that I grew up with. The one where people are hanging their heads, the look of just looking down because they had been so, treated like crap, because they really believed that they were worth nothing. And I looked around that day and I was so mad. I was so mad. And I thought, this is wrong. This is wrong. This woman cannot come in here and make us feel any worse than we already do. I drew from that and I realized that I had to fight against that. That I didn't want to bring my children into the world to have that feeling. And since then, I've definitely grown out of that. I realize I am an Indigenous woman, and I'm totally proud of who I am. I would not want to be anybody else. I realize that there's so much beauty in our culture, in our ways. It's our strength, and that we have something totally important, so totally beautiful to share with the world. When people start to learn who and what and where we're going, and our vision, what we want to do, is that it's going to help the world. So I feel that since those days, we've come a long way, a real long way, on all fronts, politically, just with ourselves, becoming stronger human beings, gaining rights, just the way that people live You know, there's not as much poverty as there was, you know, so we've really been on an amazing journey, and I like to think of it as a movement of people that decided we're not going to do this anymore. We're changing our destiny, you know, and to me that's true self-determination, is deciding you're going to change it and doing it yourselves.
By the mountain, we have a metaphor which is vertical from the bottom to the top, you know, and then verticality in the landscape or in our life is important, you know, to stay vertical. I think is an awareness of being alive. So in many ways, this ritual of climbing a mountain has all parallels how I have to live my life in order to get to the top. Fantastic, the simplicity, how the mountain can tell you precisely what's right and what's wrong. Or the philosophy of climbing, you know, how do I reason, and similar decisions you make in life. The tree impresses me because of endurance, especially nowadays. You know, we hardly have minutes where an individual consciously knows what the core is of one's being. And the tree stands there for 200, 300, 400 years, and every given second, he wants to be the tree. Imagine that a pine tree for a season would like to be a willow tree. That's how we live. You know, we don't accept, really we accept what we are. We always want to be different. And the way we keep changing and want to fix things up, you know, and instead accepting what there is. So endurance, consistency, you know, I think is the power, if we live by that. The wolf is part of my life because of his spirit and the truthfulness, how the wolf lives. Similar when I think you wrote the story about the wolf attack I had experienced. The wolf rarely attacks a human, hardly ever, hardly heard of. And when they were sort of going for attack, because they mistook me for a caribou, and when they realized I'm human, they backed up. And it was deep winter, they were starving, they were skeleton-like in their appearance, 12 of them, and they did not kill. And that I admire, you know, that they live in a groove which has a truth, as we don't have that. You know, we kill because it's convenient, sometimes we kill because we love it, and frightening, you know, how we live and how we intellectually, cleverly manipulate the truth just to give ourselves another little convenience. We, you know, the slaughter we create globally for thousands of years, we always intellectually try to justify it.
That's not quite the right answer. Because if you catch your grandpa, you fall down. Yeah.
Now you fall down there.
You know, their culture was different. So if we practice our own, which was against the faith of the Catholic Church. Mind you, I didn't even know what a sin was until I went to residential school. And like we talk about it today, those that went to residential school, it was a sin. Everything was a sin. You couldn't think, You couldn't look, you couldn't hear, because someplace a word was a sin, someplace what you see, something in there was a sin, you know, and if you spoke a word with what you spoke was a sin. So if we sin, we're going to go to hell, you know, that's what we're going to burn in hell forever. So you weren't able to think, and you become, I guess you become part of that, you know. And so in teaching us that, they taught us how to be ashamed of our language, to be ashamed of our parents, because our parents didn't know how, a word of English, and didn't know this other kind of life. And I think it was really me, I look at it as being ashamed of your culture, your parents' ways, their ways, which was primitive.
Oh, it's cold. That's a sip of history. It's good. And I already feel 15, 20,000 years old.
Just today we were sitting in a curriculum meeting, and there was a lot of discussion about politics and bureaucracy within our First Nation and within within our nation. And one of my examples, I was just getting super frustrated because we weren't looking at the bigger picture when it was not even 100 feet away, right. You know, and I didn't feel like we were talking about what really mattered. I mean, they kept saying it was for the future, this is what we're doing, and I was just really frustrated because they weren't focusing on the future. They weren't focusing on what the issues were right now. Mm-hmm. And I talked about the flood. I talked about it. It's happening, and it's happening quickly. And I stated not to say that we should be afraid and that we should be using it as a propaganda scheme. It's not like that. We should be thinking and focusing on right now, on what we could be doing right now.
It's that great unknown. I think we live in that time where, you know, I remember as a kid, everyone used to talk about the future. There's the wonder of the future. Oh, the future is going to come, and, you know, science is going to save everything. We're going to live in this wonderful utopia of the future. And, like, nobody talks about the future anymore. Like, nobody wants to talk about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It's just like, we don't talk about that. We don't mention the future, man. Like, nobody wants to go there, think about it. And it's like the same thing up here, you know, like people just that, I don't know. Shit's changing. I don't know. Fish gonna die. I don't know.
One day, my cousin came across and told us that there's water coming down. This was in January. Cold water just coming down that hill there. In all of history, you don't hear about flooding across on that part of the land. You don't hear about it. Yes, on lakes and creeks, if there's overflood, it happens, but it freezes right away. But this is on the land. The water is pouring down in January. This winter, there's 2 winters now that is happening down here and there on the just the side of Caribou Creek, you know, and places. What about other places we don't see? The hills are shrinking. You know, the land is shrinking. It's the permafrost melting and oozing off, you know, and because it's shrinking. What used to be big hills and quite a big distance. Now it's just a short distance. You know, it's not right. It's not good.
Right now, the lake has a higher water level than any other year, higher than when I came, since '74. And the mountain creeks now in August are still swollen, so it will still keep climbing. As here, the lake has a high water level in the autumn because of the prolonged melting of the glacier, which is a gigantic water source, the river from the glaciers. And like once the glacier, which is now 60 miles south of us, 15,000 years ago, went as far as 150 miles north from here, went as far as Whitehorse. And it carved the landscape. Nothing, there's no bigger force the way it changes the landscape. And even in the short time span since I'm here, the first time I walked to the glacier in '74, and now when I take groups there, we walk 1 hour longer to get to the ice. And in the last 3-4 years, the changes are drastic.
I mean, there's always been change. There's nothing new about that. We've always had to adapt and learn to function and under various circumstances. And I think what we're probably the biggest change now is global warming or climate change, I suppose you could say. And one of the biggest effects that I see going on right now is the fact that our elders aren't able to predict the weather like they used to. Now then, what happens to all of that traditional knowledge if you can't say with certainty what's going to happen in a winter or in a summer or in a week? So what we need to do is find ways to use technology and apply our traditional knowledge with the use of technology, to combine the two so that we are able to make decisions based on traditional knowledge, and that traditional knowledge has value. When you look at, say, trying to predict the weather, you may look at satellite photos from the internet and then apply traditional knowledge to what you predict the weather to be. So hopefully we're able to use technology to protect our traditional knowledge and keep it relevant.
So certainly the climate change, there's no question. Even so, when I said 15,000 years ago, the glacier went 150 miles further north. So we know there is constant change. It's always animated. And when I went on my first mountain climbs with my father, we walked up a valley, and he said, "My God, when I was little, there was a glacier here, And then that was 50 years ago. So the changes were then also there constantly. But I do feel in the last 5-10 years it is drastic.
Like I told government, if we don't sit together with two government, First Nation government and territorial government, if we don't do that very soon, we'll be belly up like a fish. That's what's going to happen.
I'm always amazed at how much affluence there is, where people complain that they don't have any money. Like, you see their home and it's like huge, and they open up their garage and it's got like kayaks and four-wheelers and skidoos and trailers, and I have a boat, and they got toys and they got big screen TVs, and the more you have, the more you want, and it's just, give me all that other stuff too, and and that's just, they just kind of get hooked into it. And I think there's something about just settling down too. I noticed myself as a parent, there's something about, kind of strive for a little bit of normalcy.
Our culture is so land-based. You know, like everything we are derives from the land. You know, and the animals. Like we told you earlier, some of us are killer whales, some of us are raven, some of us are frog, some of us are, you know, beaver. So we're related to the animals and we're related to the land. And basically the land dictates who we are and our culture. You know, so if the land is changing, so are we, because we have to, you know, in order to maintain that relationship.
Something I'd like to touch on, I guess, a bit would be how we develop from generation to generation. Our culture was like my grandmother, for instance, and even Marilyn's mom, like they were put into mission school. They were robbed of their language, their culture, their identities, you know. My grandmother went through a lot of trauma, and it was, those things are passed on through the generations. I myself am a survivor. I choose to say survivor because I've stepped out of that victim role a while ago, and I'm changing my life and growing on a daily basis. But what intergenerational trauma was passed on from like my grandmother to my mother to myself, and a lot of it even to my son who's sitting here. He doesn't speak fluent Tlingit, neither do I. But we are growing in the sense that, you know, we're learning our songs, passing them on, learning our traditions, and growing from there.
Both churches and governments agreed that in order to really affect a change among First Nations people, what you had to do is get children at an early age away from the influence of their parents. So this is because many aspects of culture are interrelated, and it's hard to change someone's political or religious conception of themselves and society if they're still embedded in this network of kin relationships and kinship obligations in a community. So to pull a child out of the community, take them away from the language and the parenting, you really begin to enable the process of turning them into a worker in the European, Euro-Canadian political economic system. And so at the same time, you can start to indoctrinate them on an individual level so as to save their souls or try to effect a genuine conversion to Christianity.
That is the physical, mental, and emotional that happened. The spiritual, as my grandpa, wandering spirit, said before they hung him, they said, "White man, he might kill me, but you could never kill a spirit. The spirit will live on through my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and once unborn."
It was only in the 60s and 70s that Aboriginal people began to have some success in resisting. I mean, as early as the 20s and 30s, there's examples of attempts by Aboriginal people to band together in interprovincial or intra-provincial political organizations. But this was very difficult. In fact, it was illegal for Aboriginal people to hire a lawyer for the purpose of land claims or to sue the government for a large part of the 20th century. So this type of political organizing that you see is all the more extraordinary when you think of that. But by the 60s and 70s, partially as a result of the civil rights movement in the States, rights issues and social issues began to have a higher prominence, not only among non-natives, but also among Native people themselves. And in the 70s, or beginning about 1968 with the election of Pierre Trudeau, you see a really organized national resistance against an attempt, the White Paper, to assimilate Native people and take away their rights, their reserves, their special status, etc. And it was really this organizational effort that gives you the political scene that you see today.
Elders, they always told us, respect your land, everything on it, then you will get along. Because we're part of that, everything on this country. Before Europeans come to this country, we survived. We survived for the last at least 30,000 years.
Well, I've heard of this concept that's called environmental integrity, I think, or economical integrity, something like that. And basically what they do is they take out a square of land this big on the map or whatever, and just assess it to the fullest and analyze what they can do without hurting it, you know? What kind of, how can we keep our industries strong and not hurt the land that we're using?
In my youth, I used to skip out on a whole month of school in September because I had to harvest with my family, and I had no choice. I mean, I could kick and scream as much as I wanted. I was going, and that was it. And at the time, I didn't like it, but now I'm incredibly grateful for it. And those bits and pieces, I wouldn't say that I know all, and that's it as far as traditional knowledge goes. I'm missing a lot. But I am incredibly grateful for what I had.
We'd like to welcome you to the Trondequichin traditional territory, and we also welcome you to the village of Moose High.
Every time I come to Moose High, I go to the graveyard up there and I look at all the names on the list there, and there's names from all First Nations in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. And I'm reminded at that time, and I'm reminded by stories from our elders, how the Trondequichin looked after our people and they went to residential school here. And it needs to be said, Masi Cho, on behalf of our people. I know it's not an easy thing to do, to take care of other people in times of need, but the Trondequichin have done that, and they continue to do that today. So I just want to say Masi Cho, and I just have to say that from my heart.
Yahweh, Yahweh,
If you want to talk temperature,
sure.
It's warmer up here.
Yeah.
It is so warmer up here. Everyone, it's definitely warmer. It's a change.
So let's get into that. Sorry, what has changed with the environmental landscape in this place?
I just remember it being colder. I just remember coming up here and winter was cold. It got cold, it stayed cold, it was cold. And now it gets cold and then it's warm and it's like, whoa, it's the middle of January and it's been like around 0 for like a month. And it's like, it's Twilight Zone sort of stuff. People walk around in the middle of winter now and they just kind of like, it's kind of creepy, It's like I don't really know, or I don't have that scientific data, even though they say, the average temperature is only 1 degree above normal, and it's like, no, it's something's going on here. There's just, I haven't seen that before. It's not really that cold anymore.
And it's the far north.
Yeah.
So like, how does that impact the landscape around here? Like, are the rivers changing? Is the land changing because of the temperature? Like permafrost is melting in a lot of places, and like, how do you, as a Yukoner, like, how does that feel? What do you think?
it's mixed. Like, you know, I think it's the same with everybody on the planet. Like, you know, it ain't right. You know, there's something that's like, oh, it ain't right. It's not supposed to be that way, and it's changing, but you don't know what is it, sort of thing. You know, you know, on some level, people go, hey, it's warmer around here. It's like, cool, you know, it's fucking minus 40 for like 3 months. It's like, that's okay, you know, when it's minus 15 in the wintertime, it's like, that's a nice day. We can actually go out and do things, you know, but then there's that side of you that goes, yeah, it's warmer, but this is not really supposed to be.
Like Old Crow, to no water. Like all the little rivers down, but Yukon is still up because glacier is going.
I think it's inevitable now that we just keep progressing with the assimilation, we keep progressing with Western society and the way things are moving in the capitalist way of life.
I think we've really engaged in the most important work that's going on in our community. And the reason I say that is because it gives us the opportunity to totally grasp onto our traditional values and gives us the opportunity to every day sing the same songs that our ancestors sang. So it's truly providing a foundation of strength for us as a group and kind of, you know, at the core of our community, because, you know, we're not only just singing the songs, but the songs are like echoing through our community. People are hearing them. You know, they're really reinforcing and validating our identity, and it's just extremely a very powerful process. And to me, that's even more important because, you know, our people have been so kind of wrapped up in a political process that's been going on for more than 30 years. And striving for this thing called self-determination, which I think self-government is more about self and transformation. And us, I really feel that all of us here have taken on that. We've all decided that we are going to transform ourselves, become stronger, and become more united, and become really kind of the beacon in our nation, because we're providing light. You know, we're really grasping on to, I think, what is the most foundational part of who we are. It's our songs, it's our stories, it's our dances, it's who we are, it's our identity. So more than what I ever expected to happen this summer has happened. And I feel like true self-transformation, which is a pretty powerful thing.
Started by the time Walmart showed up. You know, there was this great old hardware store just over here where Tim Hortons is now, you know, and that went down when Canadian Tire first came to town, and you know, there was some of that big supermarket stuff already happening. It was interesting. There was, like, you know, the, I don't know what you call them, kind of like a fringe activist sort of element. You know, they were thinking about sort of you know, getting together and putting on some sort of protest and trying to stop Walmart, but it was really feeble, you know. It was kind of, yeah, sort of, it wasn't that big a deal. You know, Walmart kind of came along, and I was amazed at how many people were just, you know, just thrilled, you know. I think if you've lived in the North for a while, there's something like, yeah, okay, I left the South, and I lived up here for a while, and I'm sick of paying $9 a roll for toilet paper. You know, like there's something like that. It's like, yeah, I'll take cheap toilet paper. Fucking right. You know, that's, you know, and there's just, it kind of struck that chord with people. You know, the new Canadian Tire is the same way. People are just like, I don't need all this shit, but I just like to know that it's there.
That's how technology has affected us, is that I think we're getting lazy.
Is there internet access in Old Crow?
Yeah, internet access, satellite TV, all that kind of junk, you know.
You know what I mean? Like, why is this important?
I think because, you know, we come from a culture of resistance, a culture of survival. I mean, if that wasn't in our blood, we wouldn't be here today. You know, like our people have survived in this climate for thousands of years, and probably the hardest part, you know, like the most difficult part of that journey has been like the last 100 years since the time of contact, and just all of those, you know, major obstacles and, you know, just the impact of the things that have gone on in this territory, in our traditional territory. You know, I mean, in a nutshell, we were almost annihilated. You know, we were almost wiped off this earth. And right now, our languages are in critical condition. You know, right now, our people are dying. Our people are in prison. You know, our people are totally lost in substance abuse and, you know, all sorts of things that are still threatening us. And basically, the way I look at it, the reason I do this is because I have no other choice. There's no other choice. And I can't just be someone that just sits there and lets it happen. I need to be somebody that is actively taking action to change, you know, to rebuild, because that's what we're doing. You know, we are trying to rebuild our nation.
Language is home, and I have tried to learn my language, and I was exposed to it in school for 9 years. So, and this is a trial, this was the first years of the Yukon Native teacher program or whatever, so so I got the first taste of that curriculum. And but it was in a school setting, and we didn't go outside, and we had papers and flashcards, and I mean, we played games and that kind of thing with each other, but the most that I did learn was on the land.
I think I was kind of bred to be a leader. I'm supposed to be. It's like my fate or something, even though I don't believe it. But in the future, I just like to see us more independent. It's this self-government stuff is cutting edge stuff, and it's good, and hopefully we'll have lawmaking powers in the future, and hopefully we will have some sort of sustainable development going on up there, and hopefully our culture will still be as strong as it is now.
Well, I think, first of all, under the DIA programs, those were generally Canada-wide programs that didn't really adequately meet our needs. So when we were able to take them over, we changed the programs to meet our specific needs, and in that way, I think we were able to manage the programs better. I think culturally, it's made us stronger because what we've always said is we've always been self-governing. Self-government is not something that Canada gave us. It's simply a recognition that we do have that right to self-government, that inherent right to self-government. We can write laws on settlement land that apply to settlement land, and the government of Yukon has to change its laws, so our laws supersede Yukon laws on settlement land. And to me, that's meaningful self-government. That I think forces Yukon to act in a way that's going to be appropriate in my mind. And if they want to continue to have good working relationships with First Nations, I think they have to be very sincere in their relationships with them. And I think to a great extent they have been. There's learning curves that you have to go through, and I think we're managing those okay. Well, I think there is balance. I mean, it's really up to us to define what that balance is, and as I say, we're going through a learning phase, and sometimes finding that balance isn't always easy. In today's economy, it's really difficult for myself as an individual to sort of determine what that balance is. It has to come from a community consensus basis, and as I say, we try to work with the territorial and federal governments, and so when we bring them into the equation, then finding that balance sometimes maybe becomes a little bit more difficult, but it's something that we need to do because we, as you've heard in the meeting today, we need an economy. We live in a cash economy, and so that's the reality, but we also have a very strong culture that we want to protect, and many of our people still live on hunting and fishing, subsistence living, and so it becomes, I think, even more critical that we protect that, because I think the way our elders taught us is that someday you may not have that cash economy anymore, so you're going to really depend on the land for your living. So you not only have to protect the land, you have to protect the culture, you have to protect that way of life, so that you are able to hunt and fish and trap and make a living off the land.
Coming here as a tourist from Toronto every summer, I suddenly heard myself saying I go to school. And that's when the adventure started. That was 25 years ago. I'm fascinated to be involved in art education, as it demands everything what one got, because the learning or the discovery has to come from within. So by my approach of teaching, I don't teach information or skill. I help to opening up the person that they discover their own creativity, what I call learning from within. And it's difficult in our days when we are inundated with information, external information, because the individual has more trouble getting a sense of one's own core. And that's why I thought it is ideal to build a school here in the wilderness, because you have to leave all your little idiosyncrasies behind. They don't work here, they don't apply here. All the little escapes we have from oneself, in order not to face it. So awesome how what I could achieve with people in 3-4 week periods enhanced my life, certainly, as it is a people place, and it's truly a life-changing experience. Why here particularly I find strengths, because whatever you do here, you have to carve out your own groove. You begin to think from within, you begin to trust yourself and your capabilities, because you're the only resource here. And so happens I coming from Austria, was very involved in mountain climbing, so the mountain holds enormous spirit for me, to give me energy. Is the mountain and the tree and the wolf are my 3 mentors. And I think it's a pretty good choice, that you have discoveries in your life. Communicating about the art and the creative process demands connectedness with each other. And I think that's where the enhancement lies, that we have to learn to connect to each other. Especially nowadays, we live disconnected, which concerns me a great deal. We live disconnected in aspect of the global situation, in the social structure, and from person to person. You know, the more technology we bring in, the more we alienate each other. And in my own personal artwork, also the concept is living connected, you know, with the biggest horizon possible you can comprehend.
In our experience so far, you know, that notion of what can we do right now is consistently been a question without answer. What are you doing? What is your approach, especially as an educator in that sense?
In our mandate for CTFN, our first line is we are stewards of the land, the air, and the water. But that statement isn't true. I think it would start with the individual. It would be making small changes, or maybe even big changes in their personal life and at home. And our housing needs to be changed. Alternative energies within our homes. You know, not just relying on living on the grid. I mean, if anybody, we're closest to doing that. I mean, we did that 100 years ago. That's only 100 years ago. And it seems to me that it's pretty simple to tap into those kinds of resources that we had before. Or even the new ones, solar power. You know, there's many different options, and it's just a matter of helping people to become aware. And showing them the facts, showing them what's happening globally, because this, you know, I mean, it's not an incredibly isolated community, but it is isolated, you know, and in this small building, there's a lot of things that happen, and it's really easy to just zero in on what's happening here and not understand or see or want to even see what's happening out there. And that's one thing that I see is missing out of the curriculum. I mean, like, there's no curriculum on how to build a solar panel or how to build a fire even, those kinds of things.
Alberta is the most developed part of the north in a circumpolar sense, and the oil sands are a big part of that. The oil sands are the fastest growing source of carbon emissions in Canada. Now, people are not just facing an expansion of oil sands in the area where I work. There are oil sands proposals on the table. They're also facing a 30-year tradition of conventional oil and gas exploration, which includes linear disturbances such as pipelines, roads, and seismograph lines, as well as the pads where they put the drilling equipment when they find the oil or gas. So altogether, this has had a very comprehensive impact. Also, since the 1980s, as a matter of public policy, you've seen the subsidization of international corporations, chiefly Japanese corporations, as part of a vast land grab by these corporations to forestry rights in northern Alberta. So it's more than just a 1-2 punch, it's like a 1-2-3 punch. You know, all these things are happening at once. Alongside oil sands and oil expansion, you also need things like sand and gravel. And so mining for this type of aggregate, sand and gravel is called, mining for aggregate becomes its own little industry. By the same token, one also needs a massive amount of heat. Now, oil sands, it's not conventional oil, it's a mix of oil and sand, tar, various types of grit, water, and so it requires a large amount of processing. Many different methodologies are used to access this, mining being the classic one. However, the ones that do not cause as much surface disturbance as mining still require the cutting down of a lot of forest, and basically it changes the landscape in an irrecoverable way. So to get the heat to refine or upgrade these oil sands into something that people can actually put in their cars or burn in their homes, you need a large amount of natural gas. Now, natural gas is a clean energy, and oil sands or tar sands is a very dirty energy. So this has another development spin-off similar to the sand and gravel, but on a much larger scale, where one actually sees the proposed developments by a consortium led by Imperial Oil of the gas in the Beaufort Sea and Mackenzie Delta area. So they're building thousands of kilometers of pipeline to pipe this gas, clean energy source, in order to burn it in Fort McMurray to create a dirty energy source. Now this creates pollution in Alberta. We haven't had a problem with acid rain in Western Canada, but that's what's forecast as a result of the oil sands. Yet another proposed spin-off is the nuclear industry. We already have one, if not two, proposed nuclear reactors in Alberta. This in turn requires that northern Saskatchewan be opened up to the mining of uranium. Northern Saskatchewan will also be facing an expansion in forestry, oil sands, aggregates, and conventional oil and gas exploration, as does BC in some of these areas as well. So it's a huge complex of industrial expansion that occurs across the north. Currently there's over $100 billion of expansion slated in the Fort McMurray area alone for oil sands expansion. That's only one area of the tar sands. $100 billion, this constitutes the largest industrial project currently proposed in the world, if you look at it all together. Now, they've really opened it up to all sorts of companies all at once, which has created labor shortages, material shortages, skyrocketing costs, and generally it's been done in the context of low royalties. Recently they raised the royalties on some oil sands producers and then gave it back to them and then some in the form of a incentive to develop a carbon sequestration or carbon burial system as a way of preventing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this carbon sequestration or carbon burial, as the Pembina Institute has demonstrated, has never been proved feasible on a large scale. So really Alberta is putting all its eggs in one basket and hoping the problem will just go away. I mean, I guess you could say we've got our head in the oil sands. These 500 ducks that were recently killed on a tailings pond, it's just the icing on the cake, and I was happy to see this get some visibility. I mean, these tailing ponds alone are a huge problem. They're visible from space. It's pretty well one of the largest man-made lakes in Western Canada, I think. So what's really scary to me about the oil sands is the massive level of expansion that's occurring. So many companies developing at the same time. You know, in a more rational system, I think they would have done it with some type of public partnership, which was the original model for Syncrude and Suncor. Their progenitors were the first oil sands developers. It was very risky and they needed a large amount of investment from the state. I think the state should have a role in controlled development of this type rather than just opening up to anybody and everybody. So not only do they open up to all types of tenders, but the impact assessment process that is mandated by law, both in Canada and Alberta, is really a joke. I've been a part of this from both the Aboriginal and the government side, and the law itself, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and various provincial legislation, was passed to give policymakers a chance to rationally look at not only the environmental but the social components of this type of major resource exploitation. Companies, the oil sands companies, oil companies, and the consulting companies they pay to do their impact assessment work, they really are going about it in a way that, quite frankly, does not meet the spirit or the intent either of the legislation, the Constitution, the treaties, any commitments that have been made to Aboriginal people for consultation. I'm aware of one case in the Shell Jackpine social impact assessment. That's a part of a large mine that's now being built near Fort McMurray, where a person used the word sacred to describe a lake that was going to be destroyed, that was part of his trap line. Now, the consultants who were writing this social impact assessment report never made any attempt to find out what it meant to this person to have a cabin on this lake, or what he meant when he started talking about the word sacred. So the types of knowledge that people are offering up are not being taken seriously by the companies, because it's simply not in the interest of the companies who are in charge of producing the impact assessment documents to take these arguments seriously. In a similar way, one sees the provincial government devolving enforcement authority to companies to enforce their own environmental track record. At the same time, on a larger scale, the federal government, which has been found by the Supreme Court to have an obligation to participate in environmental management and environmental assessment, is stepping back and attempting to develop what are called harmonization accords with the provinces that really result in the federal government getting out of the business of environmental management and assessment. So we see all levels of government since the 1990s cutting back, and environment has been a major way that they have saved money and cut jobs, expertise, enforcement, resources at all levels, and essentially turned over the enforcement to the companies. I think the 500 ducks on the pond, like I said, it's not only a symbol, but it's the icing on the cake, and we're going to see a lot more of these problems with self-enforcement, self-assessment, self-monitoring by companies. It'll be interesting to see what the future holds in these areas.
Well, we have a lot of interest here. We're part of the Council of Yukon First Nations, obviously, and the General Assembly is just a gathering of all the member nations of that First Nation. We're entering some fairly critical times, I think, in the Yukon. I think the evolution of governance is an extremely important at an extremely important juncture at this point in time. So what we want to do is organize ourselves so that we can maximize the opportunities that we have in front of us, and we also want to be able to organize ourselves in a way that we are more effective politically. And so one of the critical areas that we are coming to conclusion on is we're completing a 10-year review of our self-government and final agreements, and what we're hoping is that will lead us into renegotiation of our financial transfer agreements, which will last for at least the next 10 to 20 years, maybe more. So this will be the last chance that we have to negotiate. So it's a really critical time for us right now to be well organized and very aware of what's going on in not just the Yukon but in the rest of Canada.
We have all of these resources, and just now we've signed on with mining companies and exploration companies. You know, that this is the last frontier. We have incredible resources here, and meanwhile the rest of the planet is going green. Mm-hmm. And we're signing onto these kinds of ideas, and we're not using the resources to the potential that they could be used.
Traditional knowledge does have to be taken into consideration when decisions are being made, and not just environmental traditional knowledge, but all traditional knowledge. And I'm sure that somewhere in the legislation or in the regulations, it stipulates that traditional knowledge is to be taken into consideration. I do know that within our Yukon Environmental Socio-Economic Assessment Act, that traditional knowledge has to be a part of every decision that's made, and it's right in the legislation.
Over history, the water, very little change on it in the rivers. Now the lakes are getting shallow, the rivers are getting shallow, creeks are drying up. It's your feeling. You walk on the land, and where sure there's a lot of joy yet, but what is happening to it, that you feel sad, and I don't know, it's just a feeling that we have, that there is so much sadness about her.
Recently, Prime Minister Stephen Harper apologized for the injustices done to Aboriginal people in residential schools. To me, it begs the question, what do you do when you apologize to someone? What is the meaning of an apology if there's no restorative measures to be taken? Now, it's true that the government has set aside a reconciliation fund and a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, but to me, when the residential school is a crucial element of an entire strategy of dispossessing natives from their lands and resources, to me, an apology would have to begin to incorporate some type of sharing of lands and resources and consultation on that basis. Really, you don't see this type of real strong attempt to give Native people a voice in resource management becoming the norm at all in Canada until probably the late 70s, if not later. And even in the 90s to after 2000 into the 21st century, we're still really having difficulty in setting up the institutions in which consultation could work in a way that actually takes Native values into account. So you can give Native people a voice at an official level, but if people aren't hearing them, what's the difference? And the same could be said of the apology. You can make an apology, but if an apology is just words, where does that get you?
I think it's just sort of the same thing, people looking for something a little different. It's not that it's not still here, I think the North still offers that, that there is the human landscape in the north is great. I mean, interesting people, like no shortage, and the interesting folks keep arriving all the time. It just seems like the core of the culture is just expanding. You know, it's not so far out as it once was. Like coming to Whitehorse isn't that much of a stretch as it was 50 years ago. You know, that's all. It just seems it's just that much closer. It doesn't feel like you're out there anymore. You just got to go a little farther, and I think that's probably a phenomenon that's going on everywhere, right? You know, it's like, you know, northern Alberta used to be the frontier. Western Canada used to be the frontier. I mean, you know, North America as a whole used to be the frontier, and it's just that core of culture is just sort of expanding, and everybody, you know, people that come up now, what I'm noticing with travelers, you know, like the kids that are hitchhiking, you know, you got the dreadlock, you got a drum, but you got a laptop too. You know, that's your modern hitchhiker. They all got laptop bags. They're all connected. They all stop, and they stop at your Wi-Fi, you know, sort of hotspot cafe, and they drink a latte, and they tune in, and they update their Facebook page, and they download their pictures, and they put it on their site. And, you know, and that's just, this connectedness is just expected.
With our new conservative government, Canada is really economically driven right now. But there is something that they can learn from us, because we pride ourselves on the fact that we've sustained our way of life without much development, pretty much no development there, other than, you know, the people that live there cutting down trees for firewood and stuff like that. So no macro development has gone on there yet, and we pride ourselves on that, and we're one of the most powerful First Nations in Canada.
What I find through working with people that's quite wonderful is that people have an ability to be quite creative and to redevelop or to live out their culture in quite challenging circumstances, and often to try and make the most of their lives in ways that, as you say, could tend to be quite chaotic. People manage to find order and meaning in communities that most Canadians would consider squalid and underdeveloped, and that statistically show very high unemployment, very low levels of income. So it's a very complex situation. You have people living in a socioeconomic crisis, a cultural and linguistic crisis, an environmental crisis, and yet people do manage to get up in the morning and do positive things in many cases.
I don't know, do you realize you guys are rebuilding our nation?
Yes.
Slowly but surely, because people tell us that whenever they see our plays who haven't seen it yet. But for me, it's great because I am the least experienced one out of the group here when it comes to dancing and singing. And I just learned most of the songs like this year. And it's great to learn all that, because I've noticed since doing this, a lot of the young kids in the communities are looking up to us and wanting to participate and watch more often, which to me is really great, and it makes me feel empowered. It makes me feel like I'm doing something good, because you don't really see a lot of youth these days doing anything.
I mean, that's pretty much what self-government was. I mean, the self-government part is kind of like the sustainable development thing. It's like a facade, an illusion. We're not really self-governing until we have lawmaking powers.
We've adopted a Western society, and we work 9 to 5, you know, and I don't really see where there's room to be traditional. We've adopted a Western way of living, and it's frustrating to be sitting at my computer when I could be at home picking berries with my children, or, you know, just being out in the boat, or just spending time with them. And it's frustrating to be in front of a computer and a desk sometimes, because I could be doing that, because that's what's important.
And I like to think of it as a movement of people that's decided, we're not going to do this anymore. We're changing our destiny. You know, and to me, that's true self-determination, is deciding you're going to change it and doing it yourselves.
But what we got to do, and we better do it fast, because we ruined the country already, but we could try heal it but we can't fix it with money. Never. You can always make dollar, but you can't make land.